Well, in 2000, Jesus. What happened? Hello? Okay, good. Oh my God, scared my own voice. So in 2018, our Prague team actually became a part of something amazing. We became a part of the dedicated media company that was created for a luxury brand manufacturer. Next, please. In 2019, we created a DMP hub in Prague who had to deliver personalization across 40 countries worldwide by using Salesforce Audience Studio. And in 2020, because we were working more with the HQ on the marketing automation, we built one CRM hub in Prague who had to deliver a personalized customer journeys within the marketing cloud across 12 European countries. Next one. And in 2021, we had the opportunity to actually be at the piloting the real-time personalization by using Interaction Studio. Next one, and next one. Awesome. So everything started with a heated discussion, right? Everything, if you work for a large corporation, every single discussion is happening on the board level. So after a few months of heated discussion, that was a decision that there is a need for personalization by using Interaction Studio. There were two markets that were chosen as a pilot one, and that was Germany and Belgium. And what's the most important event if you're a luxury brand car manufacturer, producer, it's basically launching a new car. this event was the launch of a new electric car. Next one, please. So what are the benefits of the existing client relationship, right? One of the key thing is basically end-to-end connectivity and talking to everyone. Every time when you work for a large corporation, there's a lot of departments, there's a lot of stuff that's happening, and you find out that not every single department, not every single headquarter or regional departments talking to each other. Next slide. So we actually had two key people in this organization, my colleague who was a part of our global CRM team, and he was basically maintaining every single discussion and conversation of the client global CRM marketing technology team. It was a consultancy for HQ, and it could work around all those 40 markets. Next, please. In terms of myself, I was a part of the European CRM team, so I was in a day-to-day communication with the client European, the regional CRM team, and we were responsible for building the journeys for European markets. And we also have our local market teams, which were supporting the client market teams, and it was a day-to-day campaign operations. Now, if you can see, on the high level, they didn't really communicate with each other. That's what we found out when we were rolling out a couple of projects. For example, when we were rolling out the customer journeys, we got the blueprints and guidance from the client European team, but when we were trying to implement it into the local markets, we find out that there was no discussion in between. So we were really helping all those streams to connect. Next one. And that's a massive puzzle how it all worked. So in terms of the evaluation, Jan already mentioned that one of the key tasks for us was basically come up with some KPIs, how to actually measure this project. How do we know that it's successful or not? Next slide, please. So the initial proposal of the KPIs was this. We had 4 business KPIs. How many leads generates, cost per lead, uplift of lead to sales conversions, and how many cars sold attributes to user touched by Interaction Studio. Then we also have 3 main areas of project health, marketing maturity, and website interactions. And for each of this area, we actually suggested a couple of KPIs as well. So in the project health, that was the number and velocity of use cases implemented and number of workarounds deployed for live chat interactions. This was the initial proposal, but we ended up with the next slide, and that's basically quite new and much less KPIs. So in the business KPIs, the client only went ahead for 2 main KPIs, and that was the leads generated and sales in general. In the maturity, we kept the level of personalization and we add numbers and levels of consent. In interactions, there were quite few new KPIs: email engagement, unsubscribe rate, and personalized region CTR. And then the website interactions, all the KPIs stayed. There was just one slight difference, not the website traffic in generic, but website traffic to a specific page.
Now it's maybe a good time to look at the overall project plan and how it generally works in car companies. So typically a launch project like this is split into 3 phases. The first phase is the announcement. So the company has an idea, all right, we're going to produce a new model. Great. So they start talking about it, they notify the press. That's the end of the first phase. From a campaign point of view, all you get is a bunch of images and generic text that you place on a landing page where you catch leads. Phase 2 is the sales availability. That's when it starts to be possible to pre-purchase or pre-book the model. One of the pilot markets in this case was doing this. They even required a down payment for the car to ensure that the people are really committed. Then phase 3 is physical stock availability. That's the time when the first produced models hit the saloons, and first people that have done the pre-order are actually starting to get them. The key thing to understand here is that the communication and the types of campaigns required in each of those 3 phases is different. In phase 1, you're mostly driving traffic, that's all you do. In phase 2, it's getting a lot more automated, and in phase 3, it's complex campaigns, including after-sales communications and things like that. Now, as you might remember from a couple of slides before, there was already Audience Studio in place, so a level of on-site personalization was handled by Audience Studio. Is that it was used primarily for retargeting. And the integration with Marketing Cloud was basically not that great. I'm not sure how many of you have come across this, but in order to match the user, they typically need to. And since the cycles for cars are long, not many people have been identified to be tracked on the website. Not great. That's why they went for Interaction Studio in order to replace some functionality of the Audience Studio in the long run, because Audience Studio is a product that's going to be deprecated by Salesforce. The blue ones already in place. The gray ones are the plan that we were implementing. So first step was double opt-in and register, including, of course, data collection for ongoing flows that would be personalized using Interaction Studio. Then they wanted lead scoring, use case, welcome journey, and baseline. The difference between baseline journey and high potential journey is the fact that we were actually scoring the users based on their interactions according to the likelihood to purchase their cars. Not only interactions were taken into consideration, also purchases and things like that. In later phases, used car use cases and trading use cases were considered, but the project didn't get to this point yet. I think we can a little bit of detail on the initial phases planning. You can see that most of the time was spent on definition, and the good news was that the legal stuff that we really feared didn't take as long as we anticipated, so it was pretty much on track. Next slide if we can. Now, here's a little bit more detail onto where we can see. Of course, the overall architecture of such a complex client fitted a big A3 paper, so we needed to do a little simplification here. Any person that would register their interest for the car on the website, which was AEM, would be created in the custom CDM layer, and then synced using Informatica Cloud that they were using as their ETL provider to Sales and Service Cloud. As you can see, this is a one-way street, which did cause a lot of trouble for the client. Good about that. From Sales and Service Cloud, there is a standard connector between Marketing Cloud and the two-way connection side is actually the Audience Studio that was in place. So nothing really complex, just exchanging audiences using Audience Studio with the website. Right, on to the next slide. We were unfortunately unfortunately very confined to this green box in terms of what we could access, because the client is very protective of their data, even to partners that work with them a long time. So, and just a side note here, due to the fact that this was maintained by a different team, we've arrived at the conclusion that the actual personalization of the website will occur at the phase 3 of the project, to which we didn't really get to, unfortunately. Next slide. So the only personalization that occurred here was that in emails. A little bit on the client expectations though. They were expecting functionality similar to the one that is there in Parrot. That expectation wasn't really met, as you know, car sales process is more resemblant of a B2B sales process than your typical going to the shop or buying some clothes. So it takes longer. There's a couple of consideration steps, and we know very well from past working with this client that most people consider specific configurations before committing to a purchase of a car. All right, next slide. Next one. And obviously, we battled low data volumes, because the executive decision just said, pilot it on this new car launch that has no previous history, so we spent collecting data. Now, a little bit on to what were the troubles we've encountered directly in Interaction Studio. Right here, you're looking at a segment definition for Interaction Studio. Obviously, this is just for illustration purposes, because we couldn't really use the actual segments due to strict NDAs. The trouble that we faced here is you can see that this is a rule group and this is another rule group. If you are building some rules, it's rather confusing. Say you flip this switch to OR. That means all of this within this group is flipped to OR. Well, in some cases, the customer wanted to have 6 rules here, and then they were fairly wondering, well, why is there so little people in this particular segment? So we had to rebuild this. So be careful and start with simple segments first. Next slide, please. Perhaps the more important learning that we've had is that the customer asked us, well, we're buying this Interaction Studio, it will generate a lot of events, we want to store those events and own them in our own data warehouse. Legitimate request, right? You want to own your data. Well, not as easy with Interaction Studio, actually. Next slide, if we can. Next one. Being fairly new to Interaction Studio, we were thinking, well, that's easy, right? There's an export data functionality. You come to the all users or to a specific segment, hit the export, and there you go. You can store the data, perhaps program a robot to press the export button a couple of times a day, and problem solved. Well, not really. Next slide. Doesn't work that simple. This is how the export looks like, and it's basically good for manual manipulations and looking what's going on. Need a full export? Oh yeah. Oh, Salesforce team selling this to the client forgot to mention that they need to buy a separate line item called data warehouse add-on. What this does is it's basically a Redshift database that Salesforce provides for you with the replica of all your events. Next slide. And it contains pretty much everything there is in Interaction Studio. But the trouble this client had with this is that they didn't come with this license fee in their budget, so they couldn't really get it through. So they needed to wait a year and do a lot of internal negotiations to eventually get it. And I'm not sure they have it even till this day. So it kind of hindered the progress of this project a bit. All right. A little bit of a detail to see that indeed there is everything that you may need. This is a detail of the user object. There's all the data, and you can even customize some of the fields there. Next one. Yeah. News is that things have gotten better over time. There are export possibilities to FTP and Facebook Sync, and also sync with Journey Builder in Marketing Cloud. Still, this doesn't really remove the need for this add-on, and this is, I would say, one of the biggest learnings we've had in this project. Next one. All right. Let's end it up with things that we want you to remember. This project was running throughout H2 2021, so there has been significant development to Interaction Studio since then, as I've hinted. We've seen that large companies tend to buy a lot of tech at a faster pace than the organization can adapt. So what you end up with is people within those organizations are rather confused and spend a lot of time adopting to new tech instead of running their daily business. Next one. If you can, don't let the board level decide of the scope of the project. Not really great. Next one. Also, Salesforce official documentation states Interaction Studio can work for e-commerce projects and content projects and any other projects. Well, if you don't have a wide data catalog and a lot of data points, it takes a lot of time to fill it up with data. You need to be ready for that for the project. And of course, the data export is not as straightforward as you would expect. Plan for it, even if it's not explicitly mentioned anywhere in the sales presentation. Still, Interaction Studio is a great tool to deliver personalization. If you have a use case where there's a lot of data and a lot of interactions, go for it. Well, that's it. Thank you, and there's room for questions towards us.
Discussion around the role of Adobe in that suite versus Interaction Studio. Things like Adobe Target.
Yeah, of course there was, it's complicated, right? They want to slowly phase out some of the Adobe stuff, but the Adobe team is obviously against that. So that's how it went. All right?
On one of the slides it said you were tracking interaction with social.
Not really. It was planned, but it didn't get to that.
Okay. I was going to ask what tool were you using, Social Studio, and now it's been sunset that with the Sprout.
Yeah, that's Audience Studio. It's basically the Salesforce DMP that was previously known as Crux. So that's for the audiences, and it's not the Social Studio, it's the Audience Studio. Those two get confused quite a lot, even in the client organization. They don't use the Social Studio. Right?
You mentioned in the data enhancement section that there were native connectors for enhancing that data. Are they any good?
Well,
Yes.
well, sort of. Some of them are good, but you're mostly safe with dumping data to FTPs at this point. And the extensibility, option of developing your custom connector is also not very straightforward. Yeah?
So how do you ensure the data that you're receiving is accurate?
Sorry, once again?
The data that you're receiving from Interactive Studio, how do you make sure that it's accurate?
Well, you don't really, because it's a new data that you're receiving, right? It's a new product. It's not the product that you already have. So all the information were really new. So, there was a lot of process on mapping how we actually going to get that. But, did we know 100% that it's right?
Yeah, there is no, I would say, extensive validation options. I think there is, an option to validate the import file for emptiness, and that's basically all there is. So you need to ensure that the exports from the other systems that feed the data to Interaction Studio are properly set up, basically.
And you also had 2 pilot countries, so you could kind of compare, one was larger than the other, of course, but you could kind of compare the data receiving from both of the countries.